Neither Pickle nor Shelley reacted to the latest sound. They were apparently satisfied with the wind and fallen branch explanation for the second thump. Or, since they were reading again, they may not have even heard it. Well, Reed heard it, and the wind explanation didn't cut it. He was listening intently now, and even though he'd heard those impacts against the house, what he didn't hear was wind strong enough to blow a branch at the house that could make noise. He should have been hearing a whistling, whooshing sound if the wind was blowing that hard. And except for the continued crackle in the fireplace, and the sound of the robot hitting Shelley's little house, the only other things Reed could hear were the impacts on the side of the house, every time the robotic skeleton hit the model house. What if it was Julius out there? What if he truly had been manipulated by Pickle's remote all this time? By now, what condition would Julius be in? What Reed lacked in intellection, he made up for in imagination. He could easily envision a body covered in swelling, blackened contortions. He could see limbs as limp as rubber, with bone fragments poking through the skin. He could see a battered face, a bleeding skull, and a spine warped into something sickeningly abnormal. If, in his exoskeleton, Julius had been spun, then bashed into things over and over, and if he'd been twisted and contorted in the way Pickle's robot had been, would Julius even be human anymore? He'd be a mutilated mass of broken bones and torn flesh. What was it Shelley's history book had said about the victims of the wheel? A victim of the wheel ended up looking like a moaning monster with bloody tentacles. Yep, that's what Julius would have become if everything Ori had done to Pickle's robot had also been done to Julius's exoskeleton. Ori rammed the churning robot into the miniature house again. And again. Outside, something hit the real house with a similar force. Reed couldn't believe Shelley and her brother were ignoring the sounds. How could they not hear them? "You never said where you were going," Pickle said. Another robot impact on the model house. Another whump outside. Pickle didn't mention the mimicking sounds. Reed's legs gave out, and he dropped to the ground. He wasn't so eager to go outside anymore. No. He now wanted more than anything to stay inside. Maybe forever. He looked around. Were all the windows and doors locked? What if they weren't? No, of course they were. Mrs. Gerard wouldn't forget to lock up. She was as fanatical about safety as she was about keeping her children well fed. Reed? Reed looked at Pickle. "Oh, I forgot what I was thinking of." "You forgot you wanted to leave a few seconds ago," Pickle asked. Reed nodded. "I think I ate too much. My brain is drowning in buffalo sauce." Pickle came up with a partial smile. "Mom does make great chicken wings." He leaned forward. "Hey, I wonder if there are more. Or more of those popper things." He looked at his sister. "Hey, Shell, do you know if Mom put away any extra chicken wings or those popper things?" Shelley looked up from her book. "Huh?" "Chicken wings. Poppers." "Oh, no. They're all gone," Shelley said. "And you can't be hungry already. How's it fair you get to eat so much and stay so skinny? My life would be paradisiacal if I could eat like you with no consequences." Like paradise, Reed thought, in spite of himself. Ori had stopped plowing the robot into the miniature house. Now he was circling the robot around the house at a dizzying speed. "I can't help it if I'm hungry," Pickle told his sister. "Well, you can't be hungry. Maybe you're just thirsty." "I want a soda," Ori called out. It was the first thing he said since he'd returned to playing with Pickle's robot. "Hey, that sounds good," Pickle said. "We don't have any," Shelley said. "Why?" Pickle asked. "Remember? Mom read some article about the combination of carbonation and sugar. She discovered that our bodies processed the mixture as if it was a poison in the system." "Right, I do remember that," Pickle sighed. "We shouldn't let her read. All she seems to read are things that make her life suck." Reed, who by now had wound himself tighter than Pickle's grasp on basic math, blurted, "Your lives don't suck. Pickle, with an open mouth, turned to look at Reed. "Sorry," Reed said. "Sorry." Pickle said nothing, but Shelley put down her book and looked at Reed with one eyebrow raised. Reed shrugged. "It's just that you're so lucky to live in this nice house and have a mother who always makes good food for you and loves you, and—" He stopped because he felt like he was going to cry, and he did not want to do that. It was the stress. He was making himself crazy with his panic. The little robot started climbing up the side of Shelley's miniature house. It looked like it had somehow grown suction cups on its legs. It scaled the side of the toy house as if it was a spider. For a moment, Reed was mesmerized by the robot's functionality, but then he realized he was hearing something outside the Gerards' house. Something new. Something majorly disturbing. Something was crawling up the outside wall of the family room. No, that couldn't be it. Could it? Reed tried to block out the sound of the little robot's clicks and drone. He listened hard beyond that. Wasn't that distant shuffling sound something on the house? Yes, there. He could hear a sort of scrambling, similar to what it sounded like when he once saw a raccoon climb up the side of his own home. Maybe it was a raccoon out there now. Maybe he was literally going insane, and he was imagining all of this. He had to be going insane. What he was hearing wasn't possible. But then, why would he suddenly be going loopy? Was it guilt? Was he such an unadulterated wuss that the second he did something a little gutsy, his brain lost its grip on reality? Was he just going crazy just because he locked Julius into the exoskeleton? "You're right," Pickle said. Reed almost jumped out of his skin. "What?" Pickle cocked his head at Reed's peculiar behavior. "I said you're right. We are lucky. It was illogical of me to have allowed that to escape my awareness. Perhaps my blood sugar is low. If I had a soda—" "We don't have any," Shelley repeated. "I want a soda," Ori said again. He must not have wanted one badly because he was still playing with the robotic skeleton. He got in it to climb up to the second floor of the small house. Reed jumped up and headed toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" Pickle asked. Reed stopped. Good question. He didn't normally wander around the Gerards' house as if he lived there. He'd been upstairs, of course, to both of the twins' bedrooms, and even in Ori's bedroom. But he'd only been in their rooms when they were in their rooms. What reason did he have to go upstairs now? What reason? Besides his what? What reason? Besides his uncontrollable need to know if something was clutching onto the exterior walls of the house by the second floor windows. Sorry. I just thought of a book I need to borrow. I was going to go get it. I should have asked first. Pickle studied Reed for a few seconds, and then he shrugged. Sure. Go ahead. You don't need to ask. Your family. This, for some reason, made Reed choke and cough, as if the words created an emotional hairball in his throat. But he knew it wasn't the words that were choking him. It was his guilt. No one in the Gerard family would have done what he did to Julius. Even if Julius was still locked in his metal skeleton in the robotics classroom, they sure wouldn't have let Julius get tortured, possibly to death, by Pickle's remote. The second they even had an inkling that it might be happening, they would have gone to check. What Reed lacked was initiative, motivation, impetus. Aha, Nissus. An effort to gain a goal. Reed shook his head. His brain was weird. Here he was, in a total freakout, because he was pretty sure he tortured someone who was now climbing up the outside of the Gerard's house, in a giant robotic exoskeleton. And his brain was defining words of the day. Maybe if Reed had more Nissus this evening, he would have saved Julius before Julius started crawling up the side of the house. Stop it! Reed screamed in his head. Julius is not on the side of the house. Oh, how Reed hoped he was out of his mind. He had a very, very, very bad feeling, though, that he was as sane as anyone. For some reason, he'd just become clairvoyant. Or was it omniscient? Or maybe it was observant and sensory aware. Because he could hear something that was definitely not tree limbs crawling against the house. Reed realized that Pickle had given him permission to go upstairs, and Reed was still standing here. What was wrong with him? He shook himself and strode to the stairs. He then ran up the stairs 2 at a time. On the landing, Reed stopped and looked around. Now that he was here, what was he going to do? If he looked out a window and actually saw what he was afraid to see, what was he going to do about it? How could he get rid of Julius and his exosuit without his friends knowing? Heck, for the matter, how could he get rid of Julius, period? Reed looked up and down the hall in complete indecision. What now? Shelley's tidy white and green room was to the right. Shelley loved white and green. The colors of purity and life, she once told Reed. Pickle's cluttered black-walled room was to the left. Ori's race car motif bedroom was across from Pickle's room. A small pale yellow half-bath was straight ahead of Reed. Light suddenly shined through a window in the bathroom. From outside. Reed gulped. He remembered that the Gerards had motion sensor lights in the backyard. One of them had just come on. Reed stared out the window intently, but nothing else happened. Except for the light, he didn't see anything. Nothing appeared in the window. No shadows. No movement. He couldn't hear anything moving anymore either. He strained to listen. Nothing. Remembering he was supposed to be here looking for a book, he figured he should head to Pickle's room and find something that he could come up with some plausible explanation for his wanting. He ignored the prickly sensation on the back of his neck as he took a step in the dark hallway. Images of Julius's bloody maimed body jumped into the forefront of Reed's mind, and he had to swallow down a scream. It's just my out-of-control imagination, he thought. Flipping a switch just inside the doorway of Pickle's room, Reed gratefully left the dark hall and entered his friend's domain. Stuffed with books, CDs, and scientific equipment, Pickle's room more resembled a laboratory than a bedroom. Only the twin bed, with its constellation bedspread, suggested the room belonged to a boy just into his teens. The rest of the space screamed, genius. Reed crossed into Pickle's wall-to-wall bookshelf. He went to a section where he knew Pickle kept fiction. Pickle read more nonfiction than fiction, but he did have a section of sci-fi books he claimed were as educational as any of his science books. Reed plucked one of the books off the shelves without looking at it. After he had the book, he stepped over to the window and looked out past Pickle's gray curtains. Unfortunately, the light in the room gave a little view of more than his own. Unfortunately, the light in the room gave a view of little more than his own reflection. He hadn't thought that through, obviously. You don't want to try to see outside at night from a well-lit room. But even with the reflection of the room in the way, Reed could see well enough that nothing was outside the window. Clutching the book he'd taken from the shelf, he turned toward the door. He spotted bloody tissues on Pickle's nightstand. Pickle's nose. Reed was supposed to remind him to ice his nose. He'd do that when he went back downstairs. If he got back downstairs. What if Julius, in his probably ruined state, was lurking outside one of the windows up here, just waiting for Reed to appear, so he could crash through the glass and get revenge? Why was Reed even up here? He should have been hiding far away from where he thought Julius and his exoskeleton was. Who went toward danger instead of away from it? Someone who wasn't 100% sure the danger was real. Reed had to know whether his thoughts were right or crazy. He made himself return to the hallway, so he couldn't continue his search for whatever was, or wasn't, out there. It was still dark throughout the upstairs, and it was still silent. Reed crept across the hall into Ori's bedroom. At the threshold, he tripped over something and caught himself by the door jamb. His heart rate sped up. He'd heard a metallic clink when his foot made contact with whatever it was. What if it was an exoskeleton? He quickly turned on the light, almost afraid to see what was on the floor. It was just a toy fire truck. Reed exhaled. He looked around Ori's chaotic mess. He couldn't remember seeing so many toy cars in one place. Not even in the toy store. Ori had one of those rugs with a racetrack on it. Toy cars were scattered all over the track. And beyond the racetrack, rug onto the wall-to-wall carpet, too. Nothing unusual here. A bright red shade with a cartoon race car on it was pulled over Ori's single window. Reed couldn't bring himself to open that shade to look outside. As he flipped the light switch and stood once again in the hall, it occurred to Reed that turning on the lights hadn't been that smart. Not only did the interior lights impair his night vision, but the lights telegraphed where he was. If something was outside, it could be hiding when he turned on the lights. Well, that was just dumb. Why would Julius be hiding? If it was Julius outside. If anything was outside. Reed wasn't sure at this point that either possibility would bring him relief. Either there was a broken and gory monster clinging onto the side of the house, or Reed was having a complete mental breakdown. Either way, he couldn't just stand here forever. They were apparently satisfied with the... Reed? If, in his endoskeleton... Mom read some article about the combination of carbon and sugar. Ooh. Perhaps my blood sugar is low. Besides his uncontrollable need to know if something was clutching onto the exterior wall of the... Why are these so long? Here he was in a total freakout because he was pretty sure he tortured someone who was now climbing up the outside of the... He remembered that the Gerards had a motion sensor. But he did have a selection of sci-fi books he claimed were educational, as many of the sciences did. How could he get rid of Julius and his exoscoot without... Exoscoot? What? How could he get rid of Julius and his exoscoot? Oh my god.